One problem that is becoming more frequently discussed is the topic of anxiety. As this problem seems to be increasing over time, there's a lot that we need to think about as a society. One topic that causes controversy is whether or not anxiety should be considered a disability. Everyone is entitled to their own opinions, but I hope that this presentation will give you a little more information to form your own opinion. It's important to note that everyone has anxiety to some degree. Anxiety is a reaction to stress, and in some situations it can actually be useful. For example, it can help you to get away from a dangerous situation. An anxiety disorder, on the other hand, is an excessive amount of stress and can actually decrease someone's performance level. One thing that is important to note is that there are many forms of anxiety. This can include general anxiety disorder, social anxiety, panic disorders, and many others. Anxiety is often connected with muscle tension and avoidance behavior. The American Psychiatric Association says that anxiety can inhibit a person's ability to function normally. This topic is important because it can affect anyone. Whether or not you actually have a diagnosed form of an anxiety disorder, it is all over the world around you. You may have siblings, classmates, or coworkers that have some type of anxiety. Oftentimes, we see that teachers and employers must make accommodations for the people that are affected. Oftentimes, a life-changing event can lead to someone feeling this sense of panic from non-life-threatening events. This is often connected with PTSD, which in our society is closely linked with ex-military men and women. These are just a few of the people that are affected by this, but another group that is often affected is college students. As you all know, the transition to college is a big one for students, and because of this, many students report that they have an increase in negative social events and thoughts and may get diagnosed with some form of anxiety. After looking at what anxiety is and why it's important, we can now take a look at what it means to have a disability. A disability is defined as a physical, mental, cognitive, or developmental condition that impairs, interferes with, or inhibits a person's ability to engage in certain tasks or actions or participate in typical daily activities and interactions. This is where I begin to see a lot of controversy of whether or not anxiety should really be considered a disability. As stated in earlier slides, there are many different types of anxiety, and each one affects people in different ways. A patient may be affected by one situation and not another. So where do we draw the line? Do we say people can't have certain jobs or just ignore what they have going on? To answer some of these questions, the United States government put in place the Americans with Disability Act of 1990. This act requires that certain accommodations be made by employers for their workers with a physical or mental impairment. What is key to this statement is whether or not anxiety counts as a mental impairment. Many may take the side that because this is such a common problem, it should not be considered a disability. On the other hand, anxiety could be considered a mental impairment that could potentially inhibit somebody's physical abilities. Along with the controversy of whether or not it should be considered a disability, there is often concern with the manner in which we treat it, which you will see later on in this presentation. One study I looked at was from the Netherlands study of depression and anxiety. They worked to find some of the ways that people are affected by their anxiety. They looked at a total of 6 different categories, including how mobility and cognition was affected. Higher scores on the test indicated more disability from their anxiety. They also performed tests about what they considered to be avoidance behaviors. These were tests about different fears that could tell them some of the common fears for different types of anxiety. The results of these tests showed that different types of anxiety were affected in different ways. For example, subjects with generalized anxiety disorder had the highest scores for 4 out of the 6 categories, meaning that they are the most affected in those categories. The categories that stuck out to me the most in regards to this study was the test of cognition. A lot of these subjects struggled to even think properly when placed in a stressful situation. Anxiety is clearly not a new thing, and we can see that throughout history. One journal I found discussed anxiety during times of war. During war, many people are put under stress and anxiety during times of a high political issue. This is an obvious situation where fear and anxiety could be high, but we can also find history of anxiety in Greek and Roman philosophy and medicine. Cicero described anxiety as permanent worry. In philosophy, it was taught that a happy life was considered to be free of worry. The last thing I want to discuss in regards to the history of anxiety is the topic of asylums and mental institutions. Many controversies regarding anxiety came from the topic of asylums and whether or not it was beneficial for the patients. Some argued that these were places of horror and even compared some of them to concentration camps, while others argued that patients were able to build a better life after being discharged from the facility. In today's society, we can see that anxiety is looked at very differently than in the past. As of 2005, there were 207 state hospitals, 50 county and city hospitals, 225 private mental disease hospitals, and 34 neuropsychiatric hospitals in the United States. Today, there are about 40 million adults in the U.S. dealing with an anxiety disorder, and about 37% of these patients are receiving the treatments that they need. There are about 25% of children in the U.S. between the ages of 13 and 18 that also deal with an anxiety disorder. Anxiety disorders are often associated with other disorders, including but not limited to sleep disorders, chronic pain, substance abuse, and bipolar disorders. So after considering all the things that we talked about here today, should we consider anxiety to be a type of disability? I'll leave that up to you to decide, but here's what I do know. The topic of anxiety is growing every single day, and it's an increasing problem. It's something that's very important in the world around you. As college students, you may be feeling the stress and anxiety of college, especially during this historical time of COVID-19. I hope that from your own experiences and the information from this presentation, you are able to form an educated opinion about whether or not anxiety should be considered a disability. Thank you.